close my eyes and I hear the cry of children. And the reason why I can hear that cry is because I was once one of them.
She was a little girl in Guatemala whose innocence was stolen. 30 years later, Adriana Jones is a cybersecurity leader, award-winning scholar, and the founder of the Innocent Souls Project. This is her story.
It just tells the story of a child that has overcome a lot and has turned pain into purpose. We cannot wait for justice to happen. We need to have a proactive approach to this issue. I share my story as a survivor of child sexual abuse, not to get sympathy, but to actually drive change. Technology is not the problem. It's a human issue, but technology has facilitated. When a data breach happens that involves children, the misconception is that it's only a technical issue, but it's not. It's a physical safety problem. The mind of the child is affected by the over-sexualization at a very young age. Their development is never going to be the same. Parents are first-line protectors. They are the ones who should know that this is happening. Just by knowing that data can be weaponized against children, I think that will actually make a huge impact in our society.
Adriana, I want to start where most people finish. You're a leader in security and the founder of the Innocent Souls Project, or TISP. But before all of that, you were a little girl in Guatemala who had her innocence stolen. Who is Adriana Jones? What is the story you carried for 30 years? And why has that pain become the engine behind TISP?
Adriana is that little girl, as you said, that innocence was stolen from. But I guess that is not who she is today. And that's very important to address. So I was born in Guatemala and raised in Guatemala. I went to university and studied civil engineering. And I became the first woman in my intake to graduate. So it just tells the story of a child that has overcome a lot and has turned pain into purpose, right? So I moved to Australia in 2017 and I did an advanced diploma in ministry in leadership. And in 2024, I was awarded with multiple scholarships to study some cybersecurity micro-credentials to take in the Institute of Applied Technology. That led me to be nominated as the best student of the year in 2024. And I was one of the students awarded on the night of the Australian Women in Security Awards in 2024. And this is where I'm at today. I started my master's in cybersecurity. And the reason why I decided to build something meaningful and with purpose was because in 2025, I decided to pursue justice for the abuse that I had to endure. And very quickly, I learned that justice is not served for many survivors, including myself. And that told me a very big lesson, and is that we cannot wait for justice to happen. We need to have a proactive approach to this issue. Right? In Australia, for example, only about 2% of reported cases lead to a conviction, which tells you a horrible story about the amount of injustice that is ongoing in a country like this one. And if in Australia that's happening, imagine how is it then around the world. I tell my story and I share my story as a survivor of child sexual abuse, not to get sympathy, but to actually drive change. It is so simple to see numbers, watch news or read the headlines of how many times children are abused, but we forget about seeing those spaces. When you put a face to the problem, it just hits home. It can be you, it can be your neighbor, it can be, what your child can be in a position where you will never want it to be. That's the reason why I decided to share my story, and that's the reason why the Innocence Souls project was built.
Adriana, we've talked a lot about how trauma can either break you or make you, and how we can direct our energy into different ways. And you are the perfect example of how you can take a really horrible experience that no one should have to go through, let alone a child, and turn that into something really, really incredible. And I wanted to know, when was it that you realized that it was the digital world that was becoming the new invisible version of the street corner where, kids were once vulnerable?
Yeah, absolutely. It was actually during my studies. I had a subject called In the Mind of a Hacker, and basically put me in that place where I had to demonstrate how a business could be compromised. And I chose that a childcare. And at that moment, I realized that, not only hackers would definitely intend to hack a childcare center for whatever reason, but I noticed as well that, that the amount of incidents that had been happening around child exploitation and child sexual abuse had any specific link to the online world. So pretty much the way that this works is that in order for a child to go through this, or I'm just going to go back to one thing there, but in order for this to happen, really, it happens before in online. So it doesn't really happen in the real world immediately. So most offenders will go online and try to get, like the sort of information that they want, like CSAM material. It's easier for them to hide behind their computers and assume that nobody is looking at them, right? So that is when I realized, okay, this is a problem. And I know, as a matter of the fact, that as soon as the internet, started to evolve, this issue started to increase. Technology is not the problem. It's a human issue, but technology has facilitated it. So that's the point where I realized, okay, there is more that needs to be done in terms of how do we handle children's information, their data, what is really shared online, how are they exposed, and truly asking questions like, why is it that we haven't done enough to just stop this from happening in the first place?
With regards to technology, Adriana, we've spoken about the site called Police to Peer Dashboard. I'm going to have it up on the screen for people who are watching. But before we continue, can you explain what this site is?
In simple words, this is a site that shows in real time who is downloading system material around it. It keeps a track of how many gigabytes have been downloaded in that country. Now, this shows it claims of what we are talking about. The activity that is happening a lot, and you can see that it's around the world, but it's very scary at the same time. It just gives us a picture that there's so many individuals in our country, outside of our country, trying to get their hands into this material. They really are trying to get it. And the question then should be, how is that being generated? How AI has facilitated it? And, how are the photos that we actually been sharing in social media can potentially be weaponized against our children and used for those individuals to obviously perform the most heinous acts against children. And I think that website obviously just gives us that picture of, wow, okay, this is really happening around the world. And if you can look at it, you're gonna see lights popping up. That's people in real time
Yeah,
down season 2.
And when people look at it, they see the dots, they see the data on there. I guess as a survivor and as the heart of TISP, what do you see when you look at these 605 plus active connections right now?
Oh wow, Lord, that's an incredible question. I think when I started TISP, I remember really well that one of the cases that shake me to my core was the case of an individual in Melbourne. His name is Joshua Brown. And he's been, he's not being convicted, but he had 156 offenses against children involving CSAM material and involving the dark web. Now, to your question, what do I see? I probably don't see, I hear. I close my eyes and I hear the cry of children. And the reason why I can hear that cry is because I was once one of them. And I think about every single one of them, not as a number, not as a dime, but as an individual. And I hope people can see that through my story as well, that we can't ignore, obviously the numbers are extremely high, but we need to try to imagine their faces. And
Yeah, it's a lot. Like to see that like 2.8 terabytes of material has been downloaded in Australia is 30 days is insane. And we were talking earlier actually about it's been reported that Australia, and this isn't, we haven't been able to confirm this, but Australia is the second highest consumer of CSAM material in the world, and not per capita, like the second highest globally, which is absolutely insane. But you know this better than everyone, and I want your opinion on this. Is why is this map so much more terrifying than a standard cyber attack on a bank?
I think that the reason is that when we see a data breach and a cyber attack to any industry, right? We as soon as that happens, one of the things that we assume is that there is a financial loss involved, in that there is names of companies that are going to be involved, and therefore, obviously, uh, we see it from a more industrialized perspective, business perspective, reputational damage, right? But when a data breach happens that involves children, the misconception is that it's only a technical issue, but it's not. It's a physical safety problem. If a data breach happens, the safety and security of a child is extremely compromised. The case of the childcare centers is a clear example that we haven't mentioned. But you see that the data breaches that have been happening there have resulted in CSAM material uploaded in the dark web. I haven't heard anyone asking the question, how is that going to affect the children in 5, 10, 20 years? That material exists there. We can't delete it. How is that going to impact the life of these children? You know? And I think that's the main difference. When we see cyber attack, we think business. When we see a cyber attack or a data breach that involves children, we need to understand that we are seeing harm.
Well, that's one of the things we talk about when we talk about risk, right? It's not just that event, it's what, the potential impact of that is. And like personally, I talk about all the time about the worst case scenario is someone dies. And, the worst case scenario is a child is harmed, which is equal, if not worse, because like you said, it's how does this affect a child in 5, 10 years? This is a lifelong impact and it's intergenerational. It's not just that child. It's themselves, it's their families. If we let this go without justice, without any kind of reform.
And without compensation as well, because when a data breach happens that involves children, there is no compensation. There is no one saying, okay, how are we going to try to compensate the harm. How are we going to facilitate help for that family? And the same with the child. There are two type of the damages that we can see that are going to be they're going to be ongoing within the future. Let me just explain that. The one thing is the data. The data is still there. Nobody can say that those images, videos, anything that has been created or that has been exposed about the abuse is not going to have an impact in their future, in their professional life, right? But on the other hand, as you mentioned as well, right, is that psychological damage. How do you repair that? And the harm that is done to children goes beyond just the harm that we will see to anything else. It's a lifetime. They have a lifetime with this trauma to live with, and I think it is unfair not to evaluate this situation and see it from a different perspective and believe that we need to start thinking about how we can not only fix it, but if it happens, how we can compensate the families and children.
I want to ask there, but before we continue, just for our listeners' understanding, what does CSAM stand for?
Child sexual abuse material.
Yep, thank you. I guess I do want to ask on that topic, and as M did as well, what is the psychological impact in 5 to 10 years a child will feel? And also from a TISP perspective, the digital world, do you think people seem to believe, oh, that's digital, that's not the same as it physically happening?
Oh, those are two very big questions there. I'm going to actually start with the second one and then move into the harm afterwards. In terms of the digital world, I'll give you a number. So more than 300 million children a year are victims of online sexual abuse in the world. Now, in Australia, the Australian Child Maltreatment Study estimates that around 1 in 4 Australians aged 16 or over have experienced child sexual abuse. Now, people think that the harm might not be the same. I don't believe that. In fact, we have a lot of children that have committed suicide because of this. Right? There has been online sexual abuse, sextortion involved, coercive control, and it leads to, as Em said, it leads to an end that people wouldn't think it's possible, but it is. The numbers are going hand in hand. Now, in terms of trauma, I mean, you can tell very clearly that the mind of the child is affected by the over-sexualization at a very young age. Their development is never going to be the same. They have been exposed to something that they cannot just delete and move on, right? That is very important because that mind matters as well for their future. I was telling Anne before we jump into our session today that in Australia, roughly around 50% of young offenders have been sexually abused. So we're talking about children that are committing crimes. Around 50% have been sexually abused and exposed to this, whether it's online or physically. The harm is there. If you want to bring the numbers down and balance in Australia, you need to look at it. Right? And the same with the online world. Look, let me just put an example, right? Like recently, we had a case of a man in Queensland that had access to 23,000 files, videos and photos of children aged 7 to 15. 456 children were identified as victims. The numbers are still going up. that is just online. That carries pain, shame, and as I said, obviously, the psychological harm is there. Now, going back to your second question about the harm, at the end of the day, the best way that we can measure the harm caused to children is by seeing what our society pains are. So if we are seeing a problem with mental health around the country, if we're seeing a lot of children committing suicide, as I said, if crime is going up, the question is why. And you go back to this topic again.
We live in a digital world. I think people need to understand it's different when 30 years ago, I'll just reference that, show my age now.
Showing your age. Yeah.
It's different at the time where the digital was the newspaper, where someone took a photo, put it on the press, and the proof was did and that was a photoshopped. Today it's instant. Everyone's connected, and especially for a child who has their big friendship group that's online, having something like that put out there has an immediate access. It doesn't just impact it that way. And it's not like, again, when I was a kid, if there was bullying at school, it was at school. That's it. It didn't follow you home. It didn't come into your bedroom. Didn't come into the bathroom. Whatever happens, especially we've seen a lot lately in the news, and I do believe, my understanding is, you can correct me on this, that there's a crackdown happening where at schools where there's photos taken of children or teachers, even for that matter, and they're notified. And somehow these technologies have, found ways to not disable this until they've actually been told. And even then, let's be realistic. You and I know that if you know how to prompt, if you know how to ask the AI, the technology, which I think, and we'll expand on, you can do anything. You can just say, take a photo and put this person in a swimsuit. This is how you trick this technology into doing things, and then you take it from there. Right, Ems?
It's insane. To expand on that, like AI obviously, and being able to prompt and just knowing where to look is all you need in order to perpetuate even more abuse. So how does it feel, Adriana, to know that AI can even now re-victimize a child? Expanding on even what Boris said before about not following you home, but a child without a camera even being in the room. And is there any way we can fight this enemy to prevent them from creating victims just out of thin air?
I think it goes back to the data point. What are we allowing even institutions to expose their children to? I think there are so many processes where taking photos of children and sharing with parents give them a full sense of security. Oh, your child is fine. But we never ask the questions of what happens to those photos afterwards. How are they being stored? And who has access to that? It goes to the data point as well. If we talk about social media and the online world in general, I think parents need to start to understand that now sharing photos is really oversharing them. We're exposing them to things that we might not even see. I mean, I think about, how many influencers share their beautiful babies and children online. And I think, gosh, like, it's so easy to screenshot that photo and as far as and just, do he needs to speak with them. So that is where I think we need to see and think through a bit more. What does data can produce and how is that being safeguarded by institutions and by individuals? We often say technology connects the world, but it also connects predators to children and at a scale that humanity has never seen before. So we just need to, I guess, think through when we think about cybersecurity, if we put controls in place. If we were to migrate that same analogy to, safeguarding children, what controls? Or that onion right of security, what's the first layer, the second layer, the third layer? I think one of the things that we need to talk about, even if, because obviously this is technology, but we need to talk about the fact that awareness is parents are first line protectors. They are the ones who should know that this is happening, and therefore they're the ones who can take the best decisions in the real world. And just by knowing that data can be weaponized against children, I think that will actually make a huge impact in our society.